Hi, it's time for a chime video. We have something interesting on the workbench today. We have a NuTone model LA71, which is called the electronic Madison, and this particular one is from 1979. Now this would be considered a modern NuTone chime base, even though it has the Telecron motor assembly and it's primarily a mechanical chime. For some reason, NuTone decided to call it the electronic Madison. And if you look at it carefully, it's like most NuTone 8-note chimes that were made in this type of form factor. This is an 8-note bar chime because you have the tone bars instead of long brass tubes. Just as a side note, these type of chimes were always referred to in the catalogs as 8-note chimes. They're not called Westminster chimes. Westminster chime, you have to have 4 individual notes. That's why on the long tube chimes you have 4 tubes. So it's not a true Westminster chime because you're missing a note. So it's just referred to as an 8-note chime. There's a little switch right down in here that you can also set it for 4 notes instead of 8. This particular chime was sent in by Mike in Ohio, and it had sort of a usual set of ordinary problems. 1, it was really dirty. 2, it was missing one of the springs for one of the plungers at the top, and also the solenoid assembly, the electromagnetic coil, was bad. And now this chime had been worked on by someone in the past, you can tell, and it had something to do with this. And I think probably what they did was they took it someplace, somebody checked it out, said this was bad, they couldn't find a replacement for it because this is a rather unique solenoid, and couldn't fix it and sent it back. So I think that's probably what that was all about. What makes this solenoid unique is not the solenoid itself, the coil inside the little steel box, or the brass tube. It's the way it mounts here. This has a flange on it and it slides into the back of the resonating box with some screws to hold it in place. So this is unique to this style of chime. This form factor was something that NuTone made starting in the early 1960s. Originally, this was designed to be a recess chime. When you would buy it, basically there would be 3 parts to it. There would be a recessed metal box that would go inside the stud wall, and then the sheetrock would be put on, and then the inner part, this, mounts into the box. So the front of this is flush with the wall, and then there would be some sort of decorative grill that would go over it. So all you would see is the decorative grill. In the 60s, it would have cloth, and many times a lot of them had the selector for the 4 and 8 notes would be on the front. There'd be a knob and a volume control over here for how hard the plungers would strike. This was always an upscale chime, always more expensive than a standard chime because it had a nicer sound. It was more expensive to make. And actually, if we look here in the catalog, this is a 1982 catalog because that's the closest I can come up with, this is what it looked like when it was brand new. And actually, if we look in the NuTone price guide, I can tell you what it cost. So in 1982, our little electronic Madison, where is it, right here in the top corner, this cost, retail price was $159, which was a lot of money for a door chime because back in those days, you could still buy a door chime for as little as $10 or $11. So it was a more expensive one. This case style here was used for many years in lots of different finishes and on lots of different chimes. I actually grew up in a house that had a chime. It was a chord tone chime. It wasn't an 8-note chime because my father was too cheap for that. And it had 3 tone bars that all rang at one time. It had a case that looked a lot like this, but it was finished in sort of a limed oak kind of look that was pretty awful. So I'm sure he got a deal on it. Anyway, so that's that. Let's get back to the heart of the video. Why is this called an electronic chime? Well, that's what I'm going to show you. So in this close-up of what's under the tone bar, so here's one tone bar, and here's another one. Tucked underneath them, what's really hard to see, is this white device right here, and another one right here, and there's actually a third one up there underneath the top tone bar, which you can't see because the tone bar is so wide. So what are these? Well, these are what makes it electronic. These are little electromagnetic pickup coils, very much like the type of pickup coils that you would have in an electric guitar. So what does this do? Well, when the chime rings and the plungers strike the tone bars make their note. And of course, when they make the note, they make it by vibrating. The vibrations of the tone bar are picked up by the electromagnetic coils, and the coils are wired to two terminals that are down on the circuit board. So if you look really carefully underneath my power wires, the black one and the red one, right here is a screw, a little hard to see. See, it's hidden down under the black wire, and underneath the red wire is another screw right there. These screws ultimately are connected to the wires that come from the three electromagnetic pickup coils. If this system was installed in a house that also had a NuTone intercom system, you could run a pair of wires from these terminals to the proper connections on your intercom system, and then when the doorbell is rung, you hear it ring here because it's a mechanical chime, but it also sends the tones of the tone bars, the signals from the tone bars, to the intercom master station, and if the master station is turned on, it'll send it out to all the speakers throughout the house. This method of connecting a NuTone door chime to a NuTone intercom system goes all the way back to the original NuTone intercom systems all the way back in the late 1950s. It became more popular in 1961 when the 2561 62 models came out, and if you were buying a top-of-the-line intercom in those days, you most likely would have a chime like this. I've worked on many houses that were built in the early and mid-1960s that have 2561s, and they have these type of chimes, usually the flush mount versions of them, and the chime is tied into the intercom because that was the thing to do in those days. If you had an intercom system in 1964, you were living the Jetsons lifestyle, and of course you were going to have a more expensive chime, and it was going to be tied into the intercom because that's just what you would do. So all of these types of chimes, whether it's an 8-note chime or there were 2-note chimes that did this also. In fact, I can show you here in the same catalog. Here we have an LB75 right here. The LB75 is called an electronic transitional, and actually it's not a bad example of a flush mount chime. Here they show it on a brick wall, and all you see is this plastic cover with the vertical stripes, and this is a 2-note electronic chime. It's all mechanical. It goes ding dong, but it has the pickups in it also. They're mounted up at the top on a little circuit board that's near the two tone bars, and this was a very popular chime. If you were doing a more modest system or you didn't want a really fancy doorbell like this, it could be used with any NuTone intercom systems. In fact, there's a whole group of townhouses in the city of Alameda, right on the water. It's called Ballina Bay, and they have 516 systems. 516 systems are a little voice-only system. It's the least expensive intercom system you could buy back in those days, and they all have these installed in the houses because they are 2- and 3-level townhouses, so you need to hear the doorbell everywhere. As an example of how dedicated NuTone was to this idea, what you see here is this is the circuit board out of a NuTone IM5000 control system. An IM5000 is a selective call NuTone intercom system. It was one of the most advanced designs of intercom systems NuTone ever made. It originally came out in the, I think it was in the early 90s, and they made it all the way through the early or mid 2000s. And it's by that point, if you had an intercom system, you would have an electronic chime module, which would plug in right here, and all of that kind of stuff. However, if you look right up here, there are 2 screw terminals, and above it, it's labeled as electronic chime. These 2 terminals here, the ones that say electronic chime, you will find on all NuTone intercom systems, regardless of what model they are, all the way through the very end of the last real NuTone intercom systems, which were around 2010. Some models, they don't have screws. Some models, like a 4006, they have little wires that you splice onto that come off one of the terminal boards. Same thing with a 3003, because it's not as complicated of a design as this is. But this just shows you that if you bought an IM5000, very advanced intercom system for its day, if you bought this in 2006 and installed it in a house that originally had a NuTone intercom system, say from the mid or late 1960s or even 1979, like this chime is from, you still have a way that you can keep the chime that you love and have had for all those decades and hook it up to your brand new, really expensive intercom system and still hear it ring through the house. So NuTone never gave up on that. Always are there connections somewhere on your system that you can connect a chime like this. Of course, I suppose we would be negligent if we didn't actually ring the chime for you. So it's a 3-door chime. You have front, rear, and side. So the rear door rings a single note, this tone bar. The side door rings a different single note, this one. And then it's set for 8 notes right now. So if we reach in here and activate the front door, you get your 8 notes. Not Westminster, just 8 notes. So that's sort of the ins and outs of a vintage, if you consider 1979 to be vintage, NuTone 8-note mechanical door chime. I hope you found this interesting, and perhaps for somebody it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell. When you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications. And every time we post a new video, you get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.